Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this to the first of your second set of commencement addresses this week. We are very grateful to have Fiona Cassidy joining us from New Zealand for this talk, and she brings some incredible experience, not just in PR, but I hope she can talk about her experience in the Army as well. Fiona is the first chair of the PR Institute of New Zealand, and she also has 2 master's degrees, and she is also accredited, as well as she's the secretary board of directors of Global Alliance. And we are very thankful to Fiona for joining us from New Zealand, where it's very late in the evening. So thanks so much, Fiona, and I'll leave the class over to you now.
Thank you to everybody who's joined today. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day. Here in New Zealand, it's Saturday, it's 7:30 at night, and it's a real honour and a privilege to be here. Now, I do have a kind of very strong New Zealand accent. I'll try to go slow. If I'm going too fast, could you give me a thumbs down, so slow down, Fiona. So in starting, I'd really like to say a huge congratulations to all of you for graduating, and more importantly, I found out earlier today that you all have new roles. So wow, that's just amazing that you can go through all the study you've had in what are really, really interesting and unprecedented times and actually find roles. So what I'd like to do is just talk a little bit for maybe 10 minutes about my own PR journey. Talk about some of the challenges that our industry faces, talk about how New Zealand has actually managed COVID from a comms point of view. And then if you have some questions, which I hope you do, then we can put open the floor to you. Does that work okay? And if it works okay, can I have thumbs, please? Fabulous, thanks so much. So as we said, my name is Fiona Cassidy. I, in my first career, was actually a New Zealand Army officer. And what I learned about being a New Zealand Army officer for almost 14 years were the skills of leadership. So one of the fundamental skills to be successful in public relations is actually to understand leadership, what it means, where you fit, and then over time become one. I was lucky enough to, well, maybe not lucky, a little unlucky at the time when I came through. There were very, very few women. Female officers in the Army. There were very few who had done the similar training as men. So it was a very, very foreign environment where women weren't necessarily accepted, but you had to be twice as good to be half as good. The lessons I learned along the way is with the military, which I do think applies to us in public relations, is you have to know your business. You have to know it intimately. You need to be able to work across barriers, and you need to be able to develop really, really, really strong relationships. But the thing that has always stayed with me through my military training is the ability to plan well, and then to actually execute. And if you can't put that all together as either an Army officer or as a public relations professional, it's really going to be difficult as you go forward. Now, I was also really fortunate during my time in the New Zealand Army to work on a number of peacekeeping missions. So I worked in the Middle East in the early 90s, and then in the late 90s, I was actually involved in a peacekeeping mission where New Zealand led a mission into Bougainville in Papua New Guinea, and we went in unarmed. So we went into a conflict that had actually gone on for 10 years, where 20,000 people had been killed, and we were able to broker peace, and we didn't have any weapons with us. So that was a really unique opportunity to develop what I would say were amazing negotiation skills. So this was a country that had been at war, and through the abilities that we learned through negotiating, to taking people through a journey for actually building bridges for people to cross in terms of negotiations. It's now 2020, and that nation has not been at war for 20 years. So all of those, that actually led me to leaving the Army. And when I left the Army, I was actually Army Public Relations Officer. And the skills that we were able to apply, and I've been able to apply, again, comes down to strategy, planning, and your ability to actually look at situations that are complex and make them very, very simple. Throughout my career, I have been lucky enough to work on both international and national campaigns. And that sounds like, what is that? What does that mean? So if we were going to unpack public relations, and I'm sure you've learnt that in recent times, the skill sets that you must be able to do, you must be an amazing communicator. And that means not just written, but that also means oral. You have to work really, really hard on getting people to work with you so that you can get your job across. So one of the most significant changes that have actually happened, and India are leaders in this, is that technology has just made our game faster, but it doesn't take away the basics. So if I look at the jobs that I've done over my life, I have run major social programs based around improving health outcomes for New Zealanders. I've worked in the world of immunisation, I've worked in primary healthcare, I have run big corporate organisations, and I've worked in agencies. And the thing you have to be able to do is, can you write well? So that skill will never ever go away. And that skill will then translate into your ability to use social media, and your ability to actually do briefs for your clients, and your ability to do ads for your clients. The second thing you have to be able to do is you need to be able to communicate orally with people. Stakeholder engagement is fundamentally at the basis of what we do. From my perspective, I am really proud to say I'm a public relations professional. And the reason I say that is that in my world, in the world that I've lived in for almost 25 years, having been a practitioner, the word relationships is fundamental to everything we do. So if we go, what are we about? We're around relationships. And the second part of what we do is around reputation. So if when we go into our organisation, we need to understand that what we are is the guardians and the listening device for the reputation of an organisation. And if we can't see that or make sure that our seniors or our bosses are aware of that, it makes that difficult. So if I was to step back and say, well, how does that work in practice? How do we care about a reputation? We all know that the media, and it doesn't matter media in what country, actually determines what will be said or thought about our organisation. So how do we ensure that we don't do anything inappropriate, but how do we get the media to work with us? So have any of you worked with any of your media? Thumbs up? No? So the biggest thing you have to do is you actually need to develop relationships with journalists. If a journalist has a story, and I'm sure that you all know this, they are going to run two sides of a story. And if it's about you, you want to at least get them to come to you. Are they going to come to you if they don't know you? Are they actually going to say you are a good source if you don't have some form of a relationship with them? No, they're not. They're going to go somewhere else. So one of the key things when you're working with your media is knowing who they are, knowing who the people are that do your round. So for an example, if you worked in IT, you're likely to have IT journalists, or if you work in marketing goods or fast moving items, then there'll be somebody who does business reporting. Or if you worked in climate change, there's likely to be an environmental reporter. Really important to develop those relationships and keep them going. It's not about influence. What it is about having open dialogue. So the second thing, so media relations is really, really important in all we do. But when I talk media, I'm just not talking about the media that we have that does the TV and the radio stations. I'm also talking about the media that an organisation has. So when you go into agencies, quite often what you will find is you'll be working with social media. and you'll have listening going on how that works, and what are people saying about me? Do I have a dashboard? How do I actually make sure that when they say something bad, when do I step in, when I don't? So your media landscape and your ability to scan across organisations is so important, because what it allows you to do is actually get ahead of the game, know what people are going to say, and more importantly, develop measures or stories or facts that you can put out. So probably, having talked a little bit about it, let me take a few examples. So when I went to Bougainville and I was the Army Public Relations Officer, I ran all of the media for us. And I remember, and New Zealand media, obviously, New Zealand only has 5 million people, but I remember people saying, well, what are you going to do? How are you going to actually get people who are armed to listen to you? And what we did is we developed a bunch of key messages, and I'm sure you've heard about key messages. So what our key messages were: we're going in armed, we're creating a bridge, we're going in armed with guitars and songs, and our cultural nuances, because here Māori culture, and I'm Māori, is really, really important to the Defence Forces. And those were our kind of 3 key messages the whole time. So anytime anybody was talking to the media, we were consistent in our approach. And what we were able to do, the other thing we did, is instead of using, and now I'm an older person, but I wasn't always an older person, instead of using just older people as a spokespeople, we used people like you, young men and women who were in the services, and they could talk to their areas of expertise. If people said, well, what do you think about going to Bougainville? We allowed them to talk to what they could. If somebody said, should the government be going, we made sure that they were coached not to talk about it. Now, during the campaign that I ran in Bougainville, I was able to have radio interviews that were done every night. We had on our national radio carrier, we brought journalists up to come and actually see what was going on, so that they could see that what we were doing was nice and open and transparent. And when they went back, we continued to feed them stories. And it was actually quite easy, because the New Zealand Defence Force was so good at what it did, the Bougainvilleans wanted us there, that we were able to always have a stream of truthful stories. Because one of the things you must always remember if you deal with the media is you always be honest. And I know that you've probably learned that while you've been on your course, but never lie, never put yourself in a situation where your reputation then becomes tarnished. Because the great thing about the world of public relations is everybody knows everybody, and they know if you make a mistake, and they also know if you do very well. And so it's really important to always ensure your integrity and your ethics stand at the front. So that's an example of media relations. Other campaigns that I've been involved with have been some health campaigns. So a few years ago, I was lucky enough to work in immunisation. So, and I was brought in to be the comms professional on that. And immunisation in New Zealand, and I am sure throughout the world, can be quite a tricky subject. So what we were trying to do was ensure that all parents in New Zealand, we give free immunisation for certain age groups, but people were a little bit scared and sceptical about that. So we actually ran a campaign where, first of all, we had to actually understand who are the stakeholders. And when you're looking at stakeholders, you're not only looking at those people who actually agree with what you do, you're looking for those people who oppose what you do. Because stakeholders are those who actually influence the program of work you're doing. So in the world of immunisation, while we were looking to make sure that we could talk to mums and dads, and then, community leaders and teachers and ministers and priests, we also had to make sure that we didn't not think about the anti-vax people, the people who don't like programs of work. So what we were trying to do was get people to do measles, mumps and rubella, this particular immunisation. So what we ended up doing was running a program where our public health nurses were the front facing. They had the skills and the tools they needed to communicate with their people. The parents had to sign the immunisation so the children could get vaccinated. And so we took our messages out to where we knew our families would be. So in New Zealand, and I think also in India, sports is quite important. So for us, a lot of parents can be found at rugby's a big sport in New Zealand, cricket's a big sport in New Zealand, netball's a big sport in New Zealand. So we went to places like that and we handed out pamphlets and we had balloons, and we were basically trying to get people to know that this campaign was coming on, so that when the leaflets went out through the school, it wasn't uncommon. Now, complementing that, while we had our stakeholder program and our community program going, we also developed a very, very simple advertising campaign with one key message which allowed people, wherever they were, radio, TV, if they were on the net, they would always see the same banner. And so that's the other thing. It's really important when you actually are working on a campaign, is keep things really simple. You don't always have to have the flashiest idea, you just have to have the thing that connects. And I suppose that's another word that I think is really important in the world now, is we need to think about the word connect. What I'd like to do now is just talk a little bit about the program of work that happened here in New Zealand. As some of you may know, New Zealand is actually COVID. We don't have any cases anymore in New Zealand in COVID-19. We are now up to day 21, where there have been no cases whatsoever. And we are all back out and about, what we call level 1. We've had 4 levels where New Zealanders are almost back to normal. The only thing we're not allowing is we're very, very strict on our border controls. Now, if you look back on the campaign that ran here in New Zealand, the reason that New Zealanders, all 5 million or almost 5 million of us, were on board, is that we were very fortunate to have amazing leaders. We have a young Prime Minister who is a female. She's not even 40 yet. And she was very, very consistent in her messaging. The government came out very strong, but also what we had, our second leader that led us through this, was our Director General of Health, so a gentleman called Dr. Ashley Bloomfield. So every day at 1 o'clock, New Zealand stopped as both our Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern and Dr. Ashley Bloomfield told us what was going on. Behind that was a public information campaign which told us what level we were at, how we needed to act. It was really, really simple. It all started off with washing your hands, blow into your elbow. When we were absolutely in lockdown, we weren't allowed to go. We were allowed to go out and exercise. We weren't allowed to be near people. We needed to stay in the bubble. Became, a huge word in New Zealand. You had to stick to your bubble. So if you were living in your family, that was your bubble in your house, whether that be 2 people, 8 people, and bubbles couldn't bump into other bubbles. They had to stay in one bubble. So the reason that New Zealanders were able to quickly and first of all, we had faith in our leadership. So I talked about leadership before, but the key messages in the campaign that was consistent throughout the almost 11 weeks as we went from total lockdown now to level 1 was we always knew what actions we needed to take as a nation. And we always knew that it was all of us that was going to get us to the starting or get us to the finish line. So that was really impressive. Communications and action. And I think the good thing from a New Zealand perspective is nobody needs to ask what communications is anymore because they've seen it in action. So the program ran through consistency from our leaders. There were messages going out every day across all of our government agencies. There were messages that it didn't matter if you were on Facebook or if you were on Twitter or if you were on Instagram or WhatsApp, everything was always consistent, really, really simple. So I think that probably our most successful national campaign through a terrible, unprecedented pandemic has been COVID-19, where we as a country fully got on board and have listened. And as I say, we are now in the fortunate position that we have been 20 days free. But what COVID-19 has done around the world for us as a profession, it's going to make it hard. it's going to make it a little bit difficult. And the world that when you started studying is a different world to the world that you're coming out into now. What we are seeing throughout our industries or our profession throughout the world is there has been a slight tightening around agency work and what's available. There is also going to be a little bit of up and down as people negotiate. What does that mean? But the fundamental thing that is really important, and I think you will find very important, is communications is key to whatever happens tomorrow. So whatever shape our world's going to be as a result of COVID-19, so here in New Zealand, for an example, our little country of 5 million, we know that 37,000 people have lost their job through tourism. So, not through tourism, 37,000 people right now have lost their jobs in New Zealand. And we know this because, you know, as a little country, we're able to hold statistics very well. But what our government's done is put lots of packages in place to help us get through those times. And they're going to be pretty tough times. But communication is going to be key, because the one thing that has been consistent through this, and I use COVID-19 or I use the business world and what it is doing, is right now what we've got happening in New Zealand is, okay, we can't travel overseas at the moment. It's unlikely that New Zealanders will be travelling for some time, and we're not very good at that because we do like to travel. However, what we're now doing is we've got tourism has been in trouble now, so now Tourism New Zealand is running a campaign for us as New Zealanders to actually go and see our country. So what we're trying to do is regenerate the economy. We're telling New Zealanders to get out and spend. We're saying to New Zealanders, invest in your own country. Yeah, you can do this as we slowly open up what has been effectively for us a 12-week slowdown. Fundamentally, key to that is actually comms. Right? So we, right now, even though there have been all the issues related to COVID-19, it's actually a really exciting time. And if you look how messages are actually being spread, or a lot of the companies are slowly taking their steps back to communicate with their publics, and they're going to need to. So it means for you guys, while it's going to be a little bit rocky as we figure out where the new world is going, you've actually chosen a fabulous profession to be in. And it means that wherever you go, yes, you might have to work a little bit harder or do things a little bit differently, but there is always going to be a job at the end of that. I suppose the next thing I wanted to talk to you about is what is happening globally. So I've talked about the New Zealand situation and what we've lost. In terms of what's happening here in New Zealand in the communication space, we have seen some of our agencies shrink, but those who are currently in in-house roles, they are relatively safe. So, you know, and also the government sector comms hasn't shrunk whatsoever. In fact, I would suggest that government comms has been so fundamental to the changes that they won't grow, but they are in a good state. People are looking at how they can do things smarter. If we look around the world, we do see that some of our bigger public relations agencies, certainly in America, they have done some belt tightening. And that depending if you're in the world of marketing communications, there has been a little bit of tightening around there because the advertising dollars haven't been made available, which often then fall out into marketing communications. In the corporates, what we are seeing though is because of COVID-19, there is a lot more internal communication going on. People need to have information so that they could make decisions. So that's great for you guys, right? That's absolutely fantastic for you as you step into your new world. If we look at what's happening in terms of economically, each country is quite significantly different. So I can't talk to the India situation, but you will be seeing some changes in your country. The one thing, again, that doesn't change is that people do need to talk, people do need to have facts, people do have to have facts so they can make decisions, and that's what part of our role is.
Some parting thoughts, Fiona. What do you think these young, soon-to-be PR professionals should be focusing on while they join their first roles?
I think the thing that's probably going to be the most significant is the actual ability. What does IT provide you? Our world now has so much information. How do you get cut through? In the world that you're working in, how, when everything is competing, do your key messages or your piece of work actually get through all of the noise? So there's so much happening now, whether it be via social media, whether it be via media, whether it be in community. So your big thing is to find that creativity that when you are asked to do a campaign, to write a media release, you've got to have something special in it that it can whip through all of that noise and actually be heard. So I've always worked on the principle, keep it simple, keep it connected, make it real. Yeah. So if you can do that, always that connection to whoever you're talking to. And I think the other thing to be really, really rememberable is there is no such thing as a public. There is no such thing as women. There is no such thing as men. When you do your programs, you need to really, really understand what drives the people that you're actually working with. You know, you can't just go 17-year-olds. You need to actually understand the behavioural science behind why people make decisions. You need to make sure that your campaigns get that cut through and connection. So that would be my only advice. Oh, and the other thing is, if you're not having fun and you don't get up every day saying this is the place I want to be, then don't stay, because this is something that you really need to love to do. And yeah, it'll be hard, but you want to get out of bed every day going, I'm going to work because I love what I do. Because if you don't, it's going to be a hell of a hard journey. So, you know, just keep in your mind, this is the reason I get out of work. I get out of work to make a difference. So I'm going to use my creative juices and always be positive and always be enthusiastic, because, you know, opens lots of doors.
That's great. Thank you so much, Fiona, for those words of advice. And thanks so much for taking time out on a Saturday evening to join us. We are also privileged, since we are a part of the Global Alliance, to have you for this commencement address. And hopefully, somewhere down the line, we'll get to meet again and have an in-person chat with you again. So thanks for that.
Good luck, everybody. Happy careers.